Coming up on Network Africa. India halts production of syrup linked to death of children in the Gambia. South Africa elected to UN Rights Council, while South Korea and Venezuela lose seats. And vaccination fails to stop surge of cholera cases in Malawi. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers. Authorities in India have ordered a pharmaceutical company to stop producing cough syrup linked after reports say that they may be linked to the deaths of dozens of children in the Gambia. The health minister in Haryana state, Anil Vij, said inspections at a factory of Maiden Pharmaceuticals found several violations of food good practices. Last week, the World Health Organization said the medicines produced by the company had unacceptable amounts of chemical substances that can cause kidney damage. Officials in the Gambia are investigating the deaths of 66 children, which are linked to 4 brands of cough syrups imported from India. Maiden Pharmaceuticals says it's shocked and saddened by the incident, and it's cooperating with an investigation into it. The UN General Assembly has elected South Africa, Algeria, Bangladesh, Belgium, Chile, Costa Rica, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Maldives, Morocco, Romania, and Vietnam to the Human Rights Council for a 3-year term starting January 1st, 2023. Germany and Sudan also won second terms on the Geneva-based body, but South Korea and Venezuela failed to be re-elected. The 47-member council cannot make legally binding decisions, but its decisions carry political weight, and it can authorize inquiries. Candidates are elected in geographical groups. There were 2 competitive races among the Asia, Pacific, and Latin America and Caribbean states to elect 14 members. Members cannot serve more than 2 consecutive terms. Afghanistan also failed to win a seat. Observers say the election was important since it could tip the power balance within a deeply divided council. Vote counts have been getting closer on key issues, and last week a Western-led coalition lost a call for a debate on accusations of Chinese abuses in Jiangxing by just 2 votes in a historic defeat.
The following 14 states have thus been elected members of the Human Rights Council for the 3-year term of the office beginning of 1st of January 2023. Algeria, Bangladesh, Belgium, Chile, Costa Rica, Georgia, Germany, Kyrgyzstan, Maldives, Morocco, Romania, South Africa, Sudan, and Vietnam. The General Assembly will consider sub-item C of agenda item 117 for the election of 14 members of the Human Rights Council to replace those members whose term of office expires on 31st of December 2022.
Over 4,000 workers of South Africa's state-owned freight company have downed tools across the country over wage disputes. Some of the affiliate unions began their strike last Thursday, picketing the State Railroad and Pipeline Company across the country. The workers say they are concerned about the high cost of living and they want decent salaries and are demanding a wage increase of between 12 and 13%. On Monday, the management offered a wage hike of 4.2% to 5%, which the striking workers turned down, saying that they will accept nothing below 7.6%. The business sector is concerned that the strike may cripple the country's already weak economy as operations at all ports are minimal. In an effort to alleviate the effects of the Transnet wage strike on the economy, the business has offered to pay increased fees of 148 Rand per container for the freight company's terminal handling services and an additional strike avoidance level until an agreement is reached. If accepted, the levy will help fill the gap left between Transnet's offer and what the unions are demanding. Members of Somalia's journalists' union say their leader has been arrested after he openly criticized new government restrictions on the reporting of militant Islamist group Al-Shabaab. The Somali Journalist Syndicate claims that Abdallah Ahmed Mumin was arrested by armed intelligence officers on Monday evening. The government is yet to comment. Somalia has consistently ranked poorly in media freedom surveys due to threats against journalists by the government and militant groups. Since the new reporting rules came into force, the authorities have suspended dozens of social media accounts and banned several websites over their alleged affiliation with the militant group. To health matters now, cases of cholera in Malawi have more than tripled in the last 2 months as authorities struggle to contain an outbreak that has killed more than 117 people so far. The UN says that cases across the country have jumped from 1,000 to more than 4,200 since August. The first case of cholera, which spreads mainly through contaminated food and water, was reported in March in southern Malawi. But the disease has now spread to 22 of Malawi's 28 districts. Experts have warned that the situation could be worsened by the onset of the rainy season in November. The government has been conducting a mass cholera vaccination in the southern African nation, which is one of the poorest in the world. Data from the World Health Organization show that this is the worst outbreak so far this year globally. The country's cholera response plan currently has a funding gap of more than $13 million. Malawi is currently facing one of its worst economic periods and has witnessed street protests sparked by shortages in drugs and medical supplies, as well as fuel, electricity, and forex. Well, joining us now via Zoom from Malawi to throw more light on the cholera situation is Florence Mwali, a journalist in that country. You're welcome to Network Africa.
Thank you very much for having me.
So what are authorities saying about this surge in the face of vaccinations that don't seem to be doing anything?
Yes, indeed. Authorities are very, very concerned because mainly we had the very first case, like you said already, in March, and this was a period whereby we've just gone from the rainy period and we're going into the winter. And this is a period whereby we don't usually have rains, but it seems that this year is more different from what we've had during the past years. And we have more cases even in a season where we're not even receiving rains. Authorities are very much concerned about this, and they are telling people to continue doing what they've been doing in the past when we had the COVID-19 pandemic, when it was worse, by washing their hands frequently, by ensuring that the food they're eating is cooked in hygienic places, and just following the measures that they've put in place. Because at the moment, even though we had the vaccine, not everybody received the vaccine. We only had about 1.9 million doses, and all those doses are currently depleted, and we're still waiting for more doses once we get funding from some organizations outside the country.
Right. Is cholera, are cholera outbreaks a common occurrence in Malawi, or is this just a case that has gone out of hand?
They are very common, only that mostly we have them during the months whereby we receive rains, and this is from around November, December until around January to February the following year. But this year is, like I said, it's different. We're having it during the months where we don't even have rains. Right now it's summer. We had it in winter, and now it's summer. We're still having the cases, so that's why it's more concerning.
Are there any other measures in place to contain the outbreak other than vaccinations?
Yes, the authorities have put in place some measures, and these include banning the sale of food, especially in primary and secondary schools across the country. They've also put out bans on, there's some district councils that have put out bans on consumption of food in social gatherings. So whether you're going to a wedding or let's say to a funeral, they're saying that you should not serve people food because mainly this disease spreads through food and of course water.
And we know that so far over 117 people have been killed by this disease. Do you have any update on the casualties?
Yes, last I checked, as of 11 October, which is yesterday, we had 176 cases of those people that have died. And the confirmed cases of those people who have the disease is at 4,351.
And finally, this compounds as an already worsening economic situation in Malawi with protests over, shortages in medicine and drugs, which is not good for a cholera outbreak situation, as well as electricity supply. Fuel situation is not so good. What's the latest on this?
Currently, many people, motorists, are still queuing up, trying to get fuel. When the fuel situation had just started to worsen, authorities told Malawians that it was because we do not have forex in the country, so they cannot purchase adequate fuel for everybody. So at the moment, we still have not received any new report or any new details concerning the situation from them. But all in all, right now, people are still struggling to purchase fuel. We're still struggling to get medicines from hospitals, and also we're still struggling just to find forex, especially.
All right, thank you so much, Florence, for joining us today on Network Africa.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's move on to other stories. For the first time since Uganda's Ebola outbreak began last month, a patient has died in the capital city, Kampala, bringing the total number of deaths since last month to 19. There are no known active cases in Kampala, but this death is the latest confirmation of the spread of the virus from its epicenter in the central region, something worrying health workers that urged the government to prevent by placing that region under quarantine. The man who died of Ebola in Kampala had been identified by health teams as potentially having had contact with the virus, but he then ran away from his village and sought help from a traditional healer in another region. The man died in Kirudu National Referral Hospital on Friday. The health ministry says 42 people that he may have come into contact with have been listed and are being followed up. The UN Refugee Agency says it's alarmed by a surge of deadly intercommunal violence which has displaced thousands of people in the west of the Democratic Republic of Congo. At least 140 people have been killed since July around Kwamoth town in Mai-Ndombe province. The clashes are fueled by a long-running land dispute and escalated when chiefs from the Teke community told the Yaka people to pay them more taxes. The UNHCR says 27,000 people, mostly women and children, have been displaced by the violence. Some have sought refuge in forests, having abandoned their farms, and more than 2,500 have fled across the border to Congo, Brazzaville. Widespread and systematic human rights violations and abuses against migrants in Libya are compounded by the lack of pathways to protection within and outside the country. Migrants are often compelled to accept assisted return to their home countries in conditions that may not meet international human rights laws and standards. That's according to a new UN human rights report. Returnees also face additional personal, financial, and psychosocial burdens due to the severe trauma they experienced in Libya. The report says that in the absence of sustainable solutions to these problems, migrants may have to re-migrate in even more precarious circumstances.
Migrants are frequently compelled to accept these assisted returns to escape abusive detention conditions, threats of torture, ill treatment, sexual violence, enforced disappearance, extortion, and other human rights violations and abuses. Collectively, these conditions have created a coercive environment that is often inconsistent with free choice. Now, assisted returns are in principle meant to be voluntary. However, the report finds that in reality, many migrants in Libya are unable to make a truly voluntary decision to return in accordance with international human rights laws and standards. Many of them find they have no choice but to return to the same circumstances that made them leave their countries in the first place. Any migrant who is returned to a country that is experiencing adverse drivers and structural factors that compelled people to leave the country, the adverse impacts of climate change and environmental degradation, human rights violations and abuses, armed conflict, persecution, or a combination of these reasons, may end up in an even more vulnerable situation.
Coming up on the program, more artifacts are being returned to Nigeria. This time, 23 are coming in from the United States. Welcome back. The United Nations Development Programme has warned of a serious debt crisis which is now taking hold in poorer parts of the world. In a report, the UNDP estimated that 54 countries with nearly half in sub-Saharan Africa need immediate debt relief to avoid even more extreme poverty and give them a chance of dealing with climate change. The countries account for more than half of the world's poorest people, and that's amid rising global recession, worries, and a crop of debt crisis in countries ranging from Sri Lanka and Pakistan to Chad, Ethiopia, and Zambia. The UNDP's administrator, Achim Steiner, urged a string of measures to be taken. They include writing off debt and offering wider relief to a greater number of countries. The report also called for a recalibration of the G20-led common framework. Only Chad, Ethiopia, and Zambia have used it so far. Residents in an area of Ethiopia's Anambra region that was recently retaken by government troops have accused fighters from the Tigray region of abuses, including extrajudicial killings. The district of Raya Kobo was held for 5 weeks by Tigrayan forces. Residents say the people suspected of belonging to a pro-government militia were targeted. All sides of the conflict in northern Ethiopia have previously been accused of violating international human rights. And Tanzania is seeking assistance from the international community and humanitarian agencies to repatriate more than 120,000 Burundian refugees. They currently live in 2 camps in western Tanzania's Kigoma region near the Burundi border. While humanitarians say conditions there may be better than at home, there have been allegations by rights groups and the UN that Burundian refugees have suffered abuses, including arbitrary arrests and enforced disappearances at the hands of Tanzanian officers in cooperation with the Burundian authorities. Neither country has commented on those allegations. The United States has returned 23 looted artifacts to Nigeria. The Benin bronzes were handed over to a Nigerian delegation at a ceremony on Tuesday in Washington. Nigeria's Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed, who received the artifacts, hailed the U.S. and its institutions for the repatriation of highly cherished cultural artworks. The Information Ministry says the returned artifacts comprise 21 from the Smithsonian and 1 each from the National Gallery of Arts and the Rhode Island School of Design. The repatriation is part of a bilateral cultural property agreement to prevent illegal imports into the U.S. of some categories of Nigerian artifacts. The items are among thousands of artworks known as the Benin bronzes stolen from the Benin Kingdom in the present-day Nigeria by British colonialists in 1897. The items were then distributed to various museums and institutions across Europe and the United States. Nigeria is set to receive much more of such artifacts from the Netherlands, the UK, and Germany. Well, back here in Nigeria, officials in Anambra State, in the southeast part of the state of the country, are asking the federal government to dredge the River Niger so as to end the annual devastating flooding disaster in communities living on the banks of the River Niger. This call was made during a tour of the affected communities by those about the impact of this on people's livelihood, raised by a lawmaker representing Anambra East and West Federal Constituency.
Residents affected by flooding in Anambra State are leaving in droves by means of canoe as the water level is not going down. Families gather what's left of their possessions and flee for their lives as the situation is rapidly escalating into one extreme emergency. Farmers who were successful in harvesting their food crops offload them at the banks of the River Niger in Oyocha access, as makeshift boats are built to aid in evacuating others still trapped in the affected areas. One is left speechless by the extent of destruction in the Oyocha area after touring the flood-ravaged communities in Anambra's East and West local government areas. The National Assembly member representing both local government areas leads the tour. He insists the dredging of the River Niger will prevent these yearly flooding incidents.
Our plea to the federal government has been to dredge Anambra River and get its normal depth, because it has been shallow over as a result of 2012 flood and other flood disasters that has happened in this area. All this while it ravages the coastal plain, leaching the topsoil into the depth of the water, and it became too shallow, the depth of the water. Another measure to control this annual flood disaster is for Nigeria to create their own dam. If Cameroon opens their dam, then we can close down our own and then open our own gradually.
He moves to the hinterlands where the affected persons seek shelter.
From Ifitogwari, heading to Umweje.
Communities such as Igbaoku, Ifite-Ogwari, and Umweje, among others, have all been overtaken.
The implication of this is the level of hunger that's going to set in the next 1 month in all the communities. Kind of diseases and other things. Their fish ponds has been ravaged. There's nothing. They don't have anything. I have written to NEMA. I have written to Minister of Humanitarian. I want them to come to our aid.
The flood has not only devastated many communities, but has greatly impacted the lives of residents living there, as calls continue for humanitarian support to keep the affected persons going till the flood recedes.
That's it on Network Africa. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Joker Rogers.